As people along the Gulf Coast survey the damage from Hurricane Laura, tomorrow marks 15 years since Hurricane Katrina, one of the deadliest and costliest hurricanes to hit our shores. Katrina caused 1,833 deaths and approximately $108 billion in damage. The storm made landfall 3 times in the U.S., first in Florida, then in southeast Louisiana, and finally in Mississippi. Katrina left New Orleans underwater. 2 broken levees flooded 80% of the city. And in the aftermath of the storm, a humanitarian disaster as thousands of people were left without food, water, or shelter. We're going to be joined this morning by 2 people that I work with here at Channel 3 and New Orleans natives. Joining us from home is reporter Travis Cummings and producer Carrie French is on the phone. They're going to be sharing their stories about what they remember during that time. Guys, good morning. Travis, we're going to start with you. I'd love to talk to you about what you remember about that time when Hurricane Katrina was approaching the Gulf Coast.
Good morning, Grace. So happy to be here with you guys this morning. Yeah, I remember it so vividly. I mean, I was 10 years old. That was 15 years ago. I had just started 5th grade at a new school. I had just got acquainted with new friends, new teachers, and then we get this notification that something is forming in the Gulf. And, we had heard this before. I had heard this before. And I remember, in the past, it had been, you weren't heeding the warnings as much as you were when Katrina hit. And I remember those hurricanes prior, my grandfather wading through the water and holding me with water up to here to get me to school. So we had lasted those storms out, but this was different. The momentum was very much so different for Hurricane Katrina. And I remember that Sunday morning before the storm made landfall, we made a decision as a family to get out and leave. I was actually scheduled to sing a solo at church that morning, my very first solo at church that morning, and we made that decision to hop on the road to get prepared. It was a 20-hour drive to Dallas, Texas, which takes about 8 hours from New Orleans. So if you can imagine what that drive was like, being in that traffic on the road to Dallas, it was incredible just to be bunched up in a car with your family members for that long. But we made that decision to get out of there. It was a tough time financially also because my family had just paid for school, so you can imagine what that's like for those families who didn't have that extra money in their pocket to spend. So you have to think about that as well, when you're evacuating, and that was tough for a lot of people there in New Orleans at that time. So we made it to Dallas that morning after, and we were able to see the impact right when it happened. And it was a sad story. We saw some extended family and even friends on television who did not get a chance to make it out, and just calling for resources. My mother's friend, her mom died, that morning. It was just a tough sight, as you know, and just knowing those people personally and seeing what they were going through was very tough for me.
Travis, thank you so much for sharing that. I know I can't imagine what it was like to go through that at such a young age. And that's Carrie, I'd love to ask you, you were at a different phase in your life when all of this happened. What was your experience like?
Well, my experience was a little bit different. I was a grown adult. I worked in radio at the time. And I never seen anything like Katrina. I've been through some hurricanes in my life, but like a lot of New Orleanians, they'll ride out the storm. And for the most part, we've never been impacted the way Katrina was impacted, a lot of us. But my story runs really deep because the day before, just like Travis, we got the notification that it would definitely make a landfall, hoping that it would make a turn like it has previously, prior to making landfall. And so my mother kept calling me. She advised me to leave, and I was going to head west like Travis, specifically in Houston. But she said, no, I would like you for to come to Atlanta. My mother at the time, she stayed in Atlanta. And so I gathered my things and I was getting ready to head to leave. And then my brother called, and him and his wife, he had a newborn on his way to Birmingham. At the time, he was working for Orleans Parish Prison. And if you remember the images, all those prisoners on the interstate, he was among one of those. But he was leaving, and I said, "Hey, man, did you tell your superior?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, what if this storm is nothing? What if there's a possibility, nothing occurs, nothing happens, and you're gonna lose your job? You got a newborn baby. I think you should go back." And so he did. But then what happened was he and some other co-workers was stuck inside a holding cell, and it was locked, and no one was in the area, and they seen water coming from the door, and so there was this banging on the door, trying to get anyone's attention to open that door, and so he was able to get the door open, and for several days, when the storm actually hit, there was no type of correspondence. And so I thought that was a turn for the worse. And during that time, a lot of those evacuees, they was importing them out of New Orleans, and they had no clue where they was going. And so he happened to land in Dallas. And so when he made it to Atlanta, I was the first one to grab him. His wife, my mother, I said, move to the side. I feel responsible. Had anything happened to him, I would have felt responsible for him. So, it was just a rough time for a lot of us. And so I'm just glad that we all were able to make it. I didn't have any family members that was impacted, other family members that were impacted. So we all made it out safely.
And of course, this anniversary, is not taking place in a vacuum. We've just had Hurricane Laura. And Travis, I'd love to know really quickly, you've been covering Hurricane Laura this week. What has seemed different this time around?
Grace, I'd have to say that momentum is different. It's been 15 years, since Katrina, and the awareness is much different now. People are heeding those warnings much sooner, and therefore you're getting that help from state, national, and local agencies. Everyone's partnering together and coming together sooner. Because it's no longer a waiting game. It's we need to get there and help our community, help people out. We're not waiting for uncertainty to pop up. We're just gonna to form around each other and unify during those times, because they are tough times. Yesterday I did the story about the power being out in Welsh, Louisiana, 1,700 people without power. And that's what people, fail to realize. It's not just that disaster during the time, but it's the aftermath. Having to live without power for a week is quite the struggle, especially when you're in New Orleans or in Louisiana, in those high humidity areas. It is brutal. And I remember sticking hurricanes out, like Carrie said, and being in the house, and playing with my cousins, even in that heat, and it's not fun at all. But I think now, this time around, and as we go on, the response is much sooner.
Travis, Carrie, thank you both so much for being with us this morning, sharing your experiences. It really puts everything in perspective, especially as we prepare for all of that aftermath from Hurricane Laura. We'll be back in a few minutes with more of your news and weather after the break. Stay with us.